Hey guys, tonight we're taking a long, slow walk into the dustier, slightly smellier corners of history, into the dim, candle-lit huts and bustling, plague-splattered towns of medieval medicine. You're lying back on a straw-stuffed mattress. Maybe there's a faint creaking of wood in the rafters above, and in the distance the clop of hooves on damp cobblestones. A flickering tallow candle casts a sleepy amber glow. The air is heavy with a mix of herbs, sweat, and whatever the local apothecary just boiled that morning. It's definitely not lavender. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Midnight in Manchester, 2 a.m. in Toronto. I'd love to know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've got a headache. Not just a light one, either. Your skull feels like it's trying to birth another skull. But it's the year 1257, and Tylenol won't be invented for another 700 years. Lucky for you, the village barber, who also happens to be the local bloodletter tooth yanker. And on Saturdays, dog neuterer is sharpening his blade. He's humming. That's not really comforting, but it is happening. You shuffle into his tiny shop walls, stained with dried herbs and something darker. He grins, revealing fewer teeth than he should, and offers you a wooden stool. It wobbles. There are stains on the floor. Definitely not wine. The cure. Bloodletting. You've got too much blood, clearly. This headache is your body's dramatic way of saying, "Excuse me, but I am too full of life-sustaining fluid." So naturally, the solution is to drain some out. He wraps a bit of rough linen around your arm and ties it tight. His knife gleams dully in the candlelight. Then, with a motion that's far too casual, he slices. Slowly, your blood trickles out into a small chipped bowl. Your headache doesn't improve, but now you're dizzy, so technically it worked. This practice, bizarrely enough, was completely normal for centuries, based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Medieval medicine believed that any imbalance in these was the root of illness. Too angry, probably too much yellow bile. Depressed, too much black bile. Nose won't stop running. Guess what phlegm? For almost everything else, it must be the blood's fault. And the solution wasn't just one tidy cut. No, they had leeches. Dozens of them, slimy and eager, waiting in murky jars. Some physicians swore by placing them on specific parts of the body temples for migraines, ankles, for fevers, and delightfully the inside of the mouth for toothaches. Imagine waking up to one of those suckers wriggling near your uvula. Sleep tight. And if the leeches didn't get the job done, you might be subjected to cupping. This involved heated glass or brass cups placed against your skin, creating suction as they cooled. It left you with huge dark bruises and sometimes blistering burns, but at least it didn't involve blades. Unless they decided to do wet cupping, which was just bloodletting with suction. Yay for innovation. Of course, historians still argue whether bloodletting ever did anything useful. Some say the reduction in blood volume helped with certain conditions like high blood pressure. Others point out that draining blood from someone already weakened by illness is, how shall we put it, not smart. And yet this idea of draining the body stuck around much longer than you'd think. George Washington, the first U.S. president, was famously subjected to several rounds of bloodletting during his final illness. They took nearly 5 pints more than half the blood in his body. Spoiler, he did not recover. Back in your medieval village, though, you're not Washington. You're lying down on a cot in a smoky hut, with a linen wrap around your bleeding arm, a faint buzzing in your ears, and a renewed appreciation for modern plumbing. The barber pops back in, and asks how you're feeling. You give him a woozy thumbs up and nearly fall off the stool. There's a small silver lining here, though. The barber offers you some wine. Not because it's hygienic, it isn't, but because it's the only vaguely sterile thing around. You take a sip. It's sour, lukewarm, and probably contains bits of something unidentifiable. But it helps you forget the leeches. And here's a fun tidbit. Leeches weren't just used for medicine. In some regions, people believed they had mystical properties. Wearing dried leeches in a pouch around your neck was supposed to ward off evil spirits. It didn't obviously, but it did smell bad enough to keep people at a distance. Maybe that was the point. As you drift deeper into this slightly woozy medieval evening, the air thickens with the scent of blood ash and whatever herbs the barber lit to cleanse the spirits. You're not sure if it's sage or just damp moss, but you're starting to feel oddly calm. Maybe it's the blood loss. And the thing is, nobody really questioned these treatments. They were rooted in logic, their logic anyway. Doctors weren't trying to harm you. They just truly believed that cutting you open, sticking leeches on your skin, or burning your body with cups would bring you back to balance. Some of the earliest hospitals, if we're being generous with the term, were run by monasteries. You'd lie on wooden pallets surrounded by monks chanting in Latin incense, choking the air as someone checked your pulse with all the scientific rigor of a coin flip. But you felt cared for. That counts for something. Later tonight, we'll get to even stranger cures things involving dung moon faces and powdered pharaohs. But for now, you're just lying there, wrapped in scratchy wool, with the town barber's cheery whistle echoing down the hallway. He's preparing for his next appointment, probably a tooth extraction, with pliers heated over an open flame. Sleep well. You wake to a faint rustling. Someone's stirring a thick paste in a clay pot by the hearth. There's a sharp tang in the air, earthy, sour, maybe even a little spicy. It clings to your nostrils in a way that makes you wish you were still unconscious. But you're up now, and so is the healer. She turns to you, proud smile on her face, holding a small wooden spoon dripping with something greenish-brown. It has the consistency of cold porridge and the smell of a barnyard in July. You brace yourself. This, she assures you, is the finest treatment in the land, a salve made from goose dung, rosemary, and because you're special. A dash of old beer. You don't ask why she's smearing it on your forehead. You're not sure it would help. And this, dear listener, is where we find ourselves tonight, waist deep in the delightful medieval tradition of using human and animal waste as medicine. Because when it came to healing the body, no substance was too foul, no excretion too sacred. If it came out of something, it might just cure you. Dung, particularly from specific animals, was highly prized. Goose droppings, for instance, were believed to be cooling and soothing, perfect for eye infections or swollen limbs. Cow dung, excellent for treating wounds. Rub it right in, don't be shy. Pig dung, on the other hand, was often mixed with herbs and wine and used to draw out evil humors, because clearly if you're rubbing feces on a festering sore, you're doing the Lord's work. One recipe from a 14th century leech book, basically a medieval medical journal, recommended applying a paste of sheep dung, barley flour, and honey to treat boils. Historians still argue whether these bizarre concoctions were based on symbolic logic, practical observation, or just sheer desperation. Likely a little bit of each. But don't worry, if dung wasn't your thing, urine had its moment too. We'll get to that more deeply later. But suffice it to say, people were practically bathing in bodily fluids, and not for fun. Everything had healing potential, so long as someone said it worked once somewhere. Back to you and your goose poo facial. The healer hums a little as she wraps your head in linen to seal in the goodness. She says it needs to steep, like a nasty tea. You lie there, motionless, slightly nauseous and start counting the thatch patterns on the ceiling. And to think, this wasn't even seen as low-tier medicine. Dung-based treatments were often recorded by educated monks and healers and passed down in prestigious manuscripts. One of the oldest surviving English medical texts, the Lacnunga, written around the 10th century, features numerous recipes involving excrement, some of them bizarrely specific. Collect dog dung from a black hound before sunrise, one suggests. Of course, because clearly sunrise dog dung just doesn't have the same healing kick. But it wasn't just about rubbing things on your skin. Some remedies had to be eaten, yes, eaten. In Italy, it was once believed that dried and powdered mouse dung mixed with honey could soothe a sore throat. Some apothecaries in Germany swore that pigeon droppings baked into a small loaf and served warm could stop nosebleeds. You didn't always have to eat the dung itself. Sometimes it was just used to coat other ingredients. For example, a medieval eye salve might be rolled in dry manure before being placed into the eye socket. Yes, into. And while we're here, let's not forget the infamous womb fumigation. If a woman was diagnosed with a wandering womb, because yes, they thought the uterus could get lost and float around inside the body, the recommended treatment was to place sweet-smelling herbs near her nose and foul substances like burning dung near her lower regions. The goal, to lure the womb back into position with pleasant smells and scare it away from the nether regions, like coaxing a cat out from under the couch, but medically. Now it's easy to laugh, but there's something oddly human about it all. A kind of earnest trial and error that feels almost modern in its clumsiness. These weren't cruel people. They were just working with what they had, and what they had included poop. Lots of it. The line between hygiene and healing was incredibly blurry. People often used dung in tandem with other cleansing agents. Vinegar, for example, was thought to cut the bitterness. Honey could help with the stench, and perhaps mask the texture if you had to consume the mixture. If you were lucky, your treatment might also involve ashes, soot, or even powdered oyster shell, because why not make it gritty while you're at it? One particularly delightful remedy for jaundice involved wearing a pouch of dried goat dung around the neck. Not to be opened, of course, just hanging there like a medieval version of a healing crystal. You'd walk around with that fragrant charm bobbing against your chest and hope that your skin returned to a more human shade by spring. And what about royal treatments? Surely Hiatai kings and queens were spared the poop protocols, right? Not exactly. Even royalty weren't above certain bizarre cures. In fact, their afflictions were sometimes treated with even more exotic versions of the same ideas. Elephant dung, imported and rare, was believed to have magical properties. A few sprinkles of this on a wound instant prestige. The queen must really love you. Weirdly enough, some of these methods weren't entirely baseless. Animal waste contains ammonia and certain bacteria-killing compounds, so in small accidental ways they may have reduced infection. But for every coincidental benefit, there were tenfold risks. Contaminants, disease, and, of course, the social implications of walking around smelling like the inside of a barn. And here's a quirky tidbit for your next trivia night. Some medieval midwives would use sheep dung, boiled in milk, as a post-birth tonic. Why? To strengthen the blood and restore vitality. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic, ritualistic, or simply the best guess in a world with very few options. Back in your straw bed, the goose dung mask is starting to itch. The healer peels off the linen and examines your skin. She looks satisfied. You glance at your reflection in a copper plate. You look not dead, which, in this era, is a win. She pats your shoulder with dung-stained fingers and gives you a small piece of hard bread. You eat it in silence, chewing slowly, the taste of ashes lingering in your nose more than your mouth. The fire crackles gently in the hearth. The shadows dance on the walls. Outside, a rooster crows. Maybe it's morning. Or maybe the rooster's sick. Either way, your treatment is done for now. Just try not to scratch. The candlelight has thinned into gray morning mist, and you're standing outside blinking beneath a sky the color of wet stone. The village feels quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, though more like the stillness that clings to places where something's gone wrong. You hear no horses, no market chatter, no church bells, just the shuffle of feet, and in the distance a low, wheezing cough. Again and again. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and walk slowly, eyes down past shuttered homes with crude symbols scrawled in chalk on the doors. A cross, a mark, a warning. The plague has arrived. And standing in the middle of this hushed street, looming like some nightmarish bird from a forgotten storybook, is the plague doctor. He wears a long, dark robe, stiff leather gloves, and that infamous mask, long-beaked, glass-eyed, stuffed with herbs and mystery. You might chuckle if it weren't so unsettling. He looks like a Gothic flamingo who took a wrong turn into town. But that strange, bird-like beak, it's not just for dramatic flair, it's for survival, or so they thought. You approach him cautiously. The mask makes him look faceless, otherworldly. His voice, when it comes, is muffled behind layers of linen and fear. He reaches into a pouch and pulls out a pomander, a small ball filled with spices, cloves, dried roses, and lavender. He waves it gently in front of your face, then gestures toward your chest. You're not sure what you expected, but being lightly waved at with potpourri wasn't it. See, back in the 14th century, no one quite understood how the plague spread. Germ theory wouldn't show up for hundreds of years, so people leaned heavily on the miasma theory, the belief that disease was carried by bad air. Stinky places, swamps, open wounds, all suspect. So the beaked masks weren't just creepy fashion. Those long noses were packed with fragrant herbs designed to purify the air the doctors breathed. It didn't work, of course, but it looked very professional. Inside those pouches and mask beaks were mixes like mint myrrh, marjoram, camphor, or even vinegar-soaked sponges. Some plague doctors added ambergris. Yes, the whale stuff, because it was believed to be especially powerful. Expensive, too, so naturally, they used it sparingly. You couldn't just waste your precious whale vomit on every sick villager. This plague doctor, let's call him Bernard, because, honestly, he looks like a Bernard. Tilts your chin and peers into your eyes. They're glassy, he mutters. You try to explain that you just didn't sleep well, but he's already pulling out a bundle of dried sage and preparing to light it. Time for a fumigation. He waves the smoking bundle around your head while murmuring something that sounds vaguely Latin, but is probably just a prayer mixed with panic. The air smells thick, sweet, and bitter, and your eyes begin to water. Not because of infection, but because he set your fringe slightly on fire. He pats it out without ceremony. You try to act brave. By now, boils were sprouting on people's bodies, large, painful lumps that oozed and reeked. They called them buboes, and they were terrifying. Some treatments recommended lancing them open with a heated knife and letting the pus drain out. Others advised pressing a live chicken to the sores. Yes, a chicken, preferably shaved, preferably alive. The theory, the chicken would draw out the disease. It would absorb the poison through its feathers and comb, leaving you cured. Until, of course, the chicken died, and then you'd just get another. It was medicine by poultry rotation. You wonder how many chickens Bernard's gone through. He looks tired. Beneath the stiff leather and ominous silhouette, he's just a man in over his head. He hands you a small wax tablet with scribbled instructions. Something about vinegar-soaked rags, a dietary shift to figs and onions, and a strong suggestion to avoid rats. You glance down at your boots where a particularly bold rodent is currently sniffing your toe. Too late. The thing is, none of this really worked. People were dying in the streets, in their homes, in the arms of their families. Entire towns emptied out. Some turned to religion, prayers, flagellation, desperate pleas for divine mercy. Others fled to the countryside or barricaded themselves indoors only to find that isolation wasn't enough. Historians still argue whether the plague doctors themselves helped or harmed more. Some were dedicated, brave souls risking everything to offer what little comfort they could. Others were charlatans, barely trained, hired by cities, more out of optics than actual hope. Their presence said we're doing something even if that something was mostly aromatherapy and bird cosplay. You follow Bernard now, winding down a narrow alleyway behind the chapel. There's a small garden where the sick are being treated, or at least left to rest. A few moan softly. One woman sings a lullaby to a child who's not moving. A monk kneels whispering last rites over a row of still bodies. The scent of death is thick. Even the herbs can't cover it. Bernard kneels beside an elderly man and begins applying a poultice. It looks familiar. You lean in. Is that onions and butter? It is. A popular remedy, actually. Some believe that onions could absorb the poison from plague air. People would hang them in windows, stuff them under beds, even wear them around their necks. And if you were really sick, they'd mash the onions with garlic and smear it onto your chest, sometimes with treacle, sometimes with turpentine. If it burned, that meant it was working. The man groans softly as Bernard smooths the mixture across his skin. His eyes flutter open, briefly meeting yours. There's a flicker of recognition, hope maybe, but it fades fast. He closes his eyes again. You step back, breathing shallowly through your nose, trying not to cry. Not because of grief, but because the turpentine fumes are extremely real. You can't help but wonder how people kept going through all this. The fear, the loss, the sheer randomness of who lived and who didn't. But somehow, they did. They lit candles. They said prayers. They sang. They planted onions. They treated each other with goose fat and rosemary, and firmly crossed fingers. As the sun begins to peek over the village roofs, casting long golden beams across the broken cobbles, Bernard rises and nods at you. He doesn't say goodbye, just turns and walks on the beak of his mask, pointing forward like the prow of a ship, sailing on through pestilence and uncertainty. You stand alone for a moment, the smell of herbs still clinging to your clothes, wondering if he'll be back tomorrow. Probably, but only if he hasn't caught it yet. You're kneeling. It's not particularly comfortable. The stone is cold beneath your knees, and the crowd pressing around you murmurs in low tones like a field of wind-brushed grass. You tilt your head slightly to peek upward past the richly embroidered hems of the royal robes to the figure seated on a small ornate dais. The king. He looks bored. And yet this might be the most important moment of your life. You've waited 3 days for your turn. The swelling on your neck. It's hot, red, and painful to the touch makes it hard to turn your head, let alone breathe easily. The village healer said it was the king's evil or scrofula, and that only the divine touch of a sovereign ruler could cure it. You apparently are lucky, because today the king is doing his rounds. He leans forward now, a thin gold circlet glinting under the chapel light. His fingers are pale, soft-looking, almost reluctant. They hover for a moment before brushing the side of your neck with a careful, practiced touch. Not too long, just enough to keep up appearances. May God heal you. He intones more by muscle memory than conviction. Then he reaches for a ribboned coin, his touch piece, and places it in your palm. You're supposed to wear it around your neck like a holy relic. It's not actual medicine, but everyone seems to believe it is so. It's worth a shot. The belief in the royal touch wasn't just folklore. It was royal policy. Starting in the early Middle Ages and continuing well into the 18th century, kings of England and France in particular claimed a divine ability to heal scrofula with a simple touch. Crowds would gather by the hundreds, lining up in cloisters and courtyards, hoping for a miracle, wrapped in a monarch's hand. To the people, kings were more than rulers. They were living symbols of divine order, chosen by God. So, naturally, that divine favor had to manifest somehow, healing disease, a perfect proof of holiness. And let's be honest, it didn't hurt the ruler's public image either. Historians still argue whether the cured ever truly recovered, or if the entire affair was a combination of placebo effect, natural remission, and political theater. Probably a bit of all three. Some likely did get better, but whether it was the king's hand or simply time doing its job remains a mystery, wrapped in royal propaganda. Scrofula, for context, is a form of tuberculosis that affects the lymph nodes, especially in the neck. In medieval terms, it was practically a divine sign, one that could be undone only by another divine force. So when your glands ballooned to the size of plums and your throat burned with fever, off, you went to the nearest palace. In France, it became a near sacramental ritual. French kings would actually say, "The king touches you, God cures you." A clever bit of passing the buck if ever there was one. In England, the custom got particularly elaborate under monarchs like Henry VII, who took great care to keep the touch ceremony polished and dramatic. His son, Henry VIII, was less enthusiastic, possibly too busy beheading people and inventing his own church, but even he kept up the tradition occasionally. You rise shakily, now tucking the touch piece into your tunic. You're not sure if you feel better, but the ache in your neck isn't quite as sharp. Maybe the king does have magic fingers. Or maybe you've just been kneeling for so long that any movement feels like relief. As you step away, another patient takes your place. An older woman with swollen cheeks and a trembling hand. She clutches the front of her dress, bowing so low her forehead nearly grazes the stone. The king repeats the process. Touch, blessing, coin. Next, there's a rhythm to it, almost like a religious chant. Outside, the line still stretches down the cloisters and into the muddy streets. Hundreds more hoping for healing. Some are clearly beyond help, fevers too high, limbs too thin, sores too deep, but hope is stubborn. Of course, not everyone believed in the royal touch. Some skeptics even back then whispered that it was all for show, a performance more political than pious. After all, if the king could cure the sick, surely he should be doing it more often, or maybe charging for it. Others pointed out that the effectiveness seemed suspiciously tied to royal popularity. Funny how the miracles always increased during times of unrest or rebellion. Still, in times of desperation, people grasp for anything. And who could blame them? When every other cure involved dung fire or knives, a gentle royal pat on the neck sounded pretty reasonable. And let's not forget, the ceremony didn't end with just a touch. Often, the coin was the real prize. These specially minted tokens, sometimes made of silver, sometimes just tin, were considered sacred. People wore them for years, even passed them down to their children. If they couldn't reach a king in person, just having a touch piece was thought to be protective, like a medieval medical insurance card, minus the copays. In some cases, priests or nobles would collect handfuls of them to distribute to their parishes. Some enterprising merchants even sold forgeries, just in case you didn't want to wait in line or kneel in front of a tired, mildly annoyed monarch. You wander now through the chapel's outer hall, where the lesser cases are gathered, people with warts, coughs, toothaches. No royal touch for them. Instead, they're being sprinkled with holy water by a monk who looks about one sneeze away from needing last rites himself. He carries a bundle of rosemary dipped in a basin and flicks droplets toward the crowd like he's blessing livestock. One young man asks timidly if the holy water works better if he drinks it. The monk hesitates, then sighs. Probably not, but it can't hurt. Which is perhaps the most honest piece of medieval medical advice you'll hear today. Back outside, the crowd is beginning to thin. Some walk away with heads held high, coins glittering at their throats. Others slump disappointed symptoms unchanged. A few begin to barter for coins in hushed voices behind the stables because if belief is strong enough, even a second-hand miracle might be worth something. You find a place beneath a large oak near the courtyard and sit clutching your touch piece and watching as the king disappears into the chapel. A few birds chirp lazily in the branches above. The sky has cleared just slightly, and the sunlight cuts through in narrow golden slats, warm, calming. The coin is cool in your hand, but it seems to hum with importance. Whether it holds any power or not, it feels like it does. And in this world of fire, herbs, blood, and superstition, maybe that's enough. Maybe sometimes belief itself is the cure. The headache has returned. Not the polite tap on the forehead kind either. No, this one is angry, throbbing. It pulses behind your eyes like a tiny insistent drum. You're curled in bed, blanket pulled up to your chin, wishing just a little bit that someone would knock you unconscious and be done with it. But then the door creaks open, and your friendly neighborhood healer steps in. She's smiling. That's never a good sign. "Let's open your head a little," she says gently, as if offering a fresh loaf of bread. You blink at her. She's already unpacking tools, a rounded blade, a mallet, something that looks suspiciously like a spoon. Your headache is suddenly less of a concern than the fact that someone is about to carve into your skull. You try to sit up, protest, argue that maybe you just need some water and a quiet nap. But she's already lighting a small fire to sterilize the instruments. Tonight, we're talking about trepanation, one of the oldest, eeriest, and most unsettling procedures in the long, wobbly history of medicine. It's where they make a hole in your skull, on purpose, to let out the bad stuff. Yes, seriously. The practice dates back thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows trepanned skulls from Neolithic times, some with multiple holes and signs of healing, which suggests people survived these surgeries. But it didn't stop with cavemen. In medieval Europe, trepanation was still very much a thing. If you had migraine seizures or even just a bout of melancholy, this was one of the go-to solutions. The thinking went like this. Pressure inside the head must be caused by trapped spirits, excess humors, or swelling of the brain. So logically, if you relieve that pressure, say, with a nice, neat hole, you'll feel better, like opening a valve on a kettle before it bursts. And while it sounds horrifying, the process was surprisingly methodical. You're lying back now, staring at the ceiling beams, while the healer marks a circle on your temple with a bit of charcoal. She hums, softly, soothingly, while heating her trepan, a cylindrical saw used for this very purpose. She shaves a bit of your hair, rubs the spot with strong-smelling wine or vinegar, and because she's thoughtful, offers you a stick to bite down on. Then she starts to scrape. The pain is spectacular. Not sharp, but deep, vibrating through your skull like thunder trapped in bone. You try not to scream. She tells you to focus on your breathing. You try. You fail. The scraping continues. Eventually, the top layer of bone is peeled away, exposing the pale inner world beneath. If you're lucky, the dura mater, the membrane covering your brain, is intact. If not well, things can get a bit messier. Now, modern scholars still debate whether trepanation was a true medical procedure or something more spiritual, ritualistic even. In some societies, it was done to release demons or cleanse the soul. In others, it was used to treat battlefield head injuries. So, if you got smacked in the noggin with a mace, this was their version of neurosurgery. And shockingly, it worked sometimes. There are plenty of skulls from the period showing signs of healing smooth regrowth around the edges of the hole. That means people didn't just survive trepanation. They walked around afterward. Some even had it done multiple times. You could be the proud owner of a skull that whistled in a strong wind. The tools varied. Some healers used hand drills, others small knives, chisels, or even sharpened rocks in rural areas. Speed was essential. So was precision. One wrong move, and you weren't just curing a headache, you were scheduling your funeral. You wonder if the healer knows what she's doing. She looks confident. That's something. She murmurs about the moon being in a favorable phase, a waxing crescent good for blood flow. Because of course astrology mattered. Doctors often consulted lunar charts before performing surgery. You don't want to drill into someone's skull under the wrong star after all. She dabs the wound with wine again, and places a small plug of cloth soaked in honey into the hole. Not to seal it, just to keep it clean. Honey was the medieval version of antiseptic. It's naturally antibacterial, and it smells better than most other options. She wraps your head in linen tight enough to hold things in place, loose enough to avoid more pressure. You're left lying there, dizzy, your skull 1 gram lighter. You don't know if the headache's gone or if you're just too stunned to feel anything anymore. Either way, you're quiet. The room sways slightly. The candle flickers. Outside, someone's carting hay past your door. Life continues. There's something almost impressive about how normalized this procedure was. No dramatic theater, no surgical amphitheaters like in Victorian times. Just a woman with steady hands, a blade, and a head to open, one patient at a time. Interestingly, trepanation wasn't always for illness. In certain parts of medieval Europe, it was used prophylactically to prevent madness, improve intelligence, or increase spiritual sensitivity. There's even some suggestion that mystics or seers had small holes bored into their skulls to let the light in, a poetic phrase, a dangerous hobby. And then there were battlefield versions. If you took a hard blow to the head, say from a war hammer, the swelling inside could be deadly. Doctors might use trepanation to relieve the pressure, hoping to save the patient before they slipped into a coma. It was a roll of the dice. But in a world without MRIs or Tylenol, you took your chances. Your healer returns with a weak broth and a smile. She tells you to avoid hard thinking for a few days. No reading, no arguing, no stargazing. Just rest. Let your skull settle. You sip the broth slowly. It tastes like boiled shoe, but it's warm, comforting in its way. You lean back against your pillow and close your eyes, trying not to picture the neat little window now embedded in your own head. And in the stillness, you realize something strange. The headache's gone. Was it the hole, the honey, the wine? Or just your brain giving up and rebooting like a medieval Windows update? Hard to say, but as you drift into a groggy, bone-deep sleep, you're oddly grateful. Not for the pain, not for the tools, but for the sheer baffling bravery of a world where people opened each other's skulls with no anesthesia and hoped for the best. That's commitment. You're outside again, wrapped in a rough wool cloak that still smells faintly of vinegar and fireplace smoke. The air is damp, hanging heavy with the scent of grass and something vaguely amphibious. That's because your latest prescription involves a toad, a dead one, sewn into a pouch and worn right against your skin. Not exactly a luxury spa treatment. The healer ties the cord gently around your neck, careful not to disturb the little burlap sack too much. It shifts slightly as you move. You can't help but imagine a tiny ribbit, though this particular toad won't be doing any croaking ever again. You raise an eyebrow. She nods solemnly. For the swelling, she says. Ah, yes, the swelling. Your ankles puffy and red from a bite or a sprain, nobody seems sure which. And in this village, there's one prevailing truth. When in doubt, apply a toad. This isn't unusual, not for the Middle Ages. Toads were believed to absorb disease, not symbolically, but literally. People thought these warty little creatures could draw illness out of the body, like a sponge soaking up poison. The key, though, was that the toad had to die while absorbing your sickness. So, if it kicked the bucket while tied to your infected limb, congratulations, your illness had transferred successfully. You were cured, in theory. Now, it wasn't always a matter of tying the poor amphibian to a person. Sometimes it got more elaborate. A toad might be dried ground into powder and mixed with wine or honey to create a potion. This delightful beverage was used for everything from fevers to the plague to somewhat hilariously fear of toads. You had to admire the recursive logic. You shift your weight, trying not to jostle the little burlap lump swinging on your chest. It's warm today. The toad pouch, also warm, is starting to smell. Slightly. That must mean it's working. As you walk slowly through the village square, a woman passes by carrying a wooden bucket filled with something dark and sloshing. You glance in. Snakes. Dead, most of them. She notices your look and offers a gap-toothed smile. Making a bath, she says cheerfully, "Of course she is." Snake baths were another peculiar treatment. The idea was that boiling snakes and bathing in the broth would draw out certain fevers or skin afflictions. In fact, snake oil, yes, the original wasn't always seen as a con. It had a place in healing traditions long before it became shorthand for scams. Back then, snake oil was often made from real snakes, usually adders or vipers. The fat was rendered bottled and rubbed onto sore joints or wounds. Did it work? Historians still argue whether the oil had any actual medicinal value, though modern versions have shown that some snake fats do contain anti-inflammatory compounds. Unfortunately, medieval processing standards were inconsistent at best. You sit by a small stream just outside the village walls, lifting your aching foot into the cool water. The toad swings forward with a squelchy thunk. Somewhere in the bushes a frog croaks in solidarity. There's a strange beauty in all this, a sort of belief in nature approach that treated animals as mystical partners in health. Toads weren't alone either. Spiders, too, had their role, particularly their webs, which were used as wound dressings. People believed spider silk had magical and healing properties. And honestly, it's not entirely wrong. Spider silk is incredibly strong and somewhat antimicrobial. But in the 1300s, that logic came with side effects like bugs. You lean back on your elbows and think about all the other wildlife prescriptions floating around. Bats were thought to cure baldness if you burned them into ash and rubbed the soot into your scalp. Owls, excellent for gout, but you had to cook them in wine and drink the broth. And hedgehog fat. A nice salve for arthritis. Oh, and don't forget mole's blood. Applied to warts, it was said to make them vanish, but only if the mole had been killed on a full moon. Because obviously, timing is everything. The blending of medicine and magic was fluid back then. Healers might mutter a charm under their breath while applying toad poultices or boiling herbs. The physical and the spiritual were rarely separated. To treat the body, you had to appease the unseen forces that surrounded it. Spirits, demons, energies, or just cranky gods. You stretch your leg and inspect the swelling. It looks slightly better. Maybe it's the cool stream. Maybe it's the rest. Or maybe the toad really is absorbing your misfortune one warty inch at a time. You decide not to question it. At least not out loud. You never know what else your healer might suggest if this doesn't work. There's talk in the village of someone being treated with fermented horse milk and ground up cat teeth for a toothache. You try not to think about the extraction process. Back at the healer's hut, she's preparing a special salve for someone with night fears, probably night terrors or sleep paralysis. The main ingredients: boiled, fennel-powdered lizard tail and a thimble of goat's urine. Stirred, not shaken. She ladles the steaming mixture into a ceramic pot. and places a protective charm on top, a thin bone carved with strange runes. Was it science? Not really. But it was a system. And within that system, toads and the snakes and spiders were allies, not pests. The natural world, unpredictable as it was, became a kind of walking pharmacy. If something moved, oozed, croaked, or slithered, chances are someone tried to turn it into a cure. Even bees had their place. Bee stings were used as a kind of proto-acupuncture. The pain was supposed to realign your body's energies and clear blockages. Yes, it hurt. But hey, if you were already miserable, a little controlled sting might just distract you enough to feel better. You're back in bed now, toad pouch resting on your chest like a squishy medal of bravery. The healer checks your foot again, makes a soft, humming sound, then nods. No infection, less heat, no sign of spreading. "You'll live," she says, cheerfully wiping her hands on her apron. You ask her what to do with the toad now. She pauses. "Bury it," she says, "facing east before sunrise. That way it won't bring the illness back. Of course, you wouldn't want a recontamination. The toad has done its job. Now it needs a respectful burial." You almost laugh, but the look on her face is dead serious. And so the next morning, you find yourself kneeling in the garden digging a small hole beneath the thyme bush. The earth is damp and cool. You place the toad pouch gently inside, say a quiet thank you, and cover it with soil. There's something oddly tender about the whole thing. Silly, yes, but also human. You needed healing. The world responded with a toad. And now, maybe, just maybe, you're better. The village square is bustling again, sort of. It's not a market day, but there's a certain buzz in the air. Not excitement, exactly. More like astrological concern. Everyone is gathered around a notice board where the town physician has posted the latest lunar health advisory. You read it twice. It's in Latin and symbols, and also blood. Someone whispers beside you. It's a waning moon. "No surgeries today?" You nod solemnly. Of course. You wouldn't want to remove a boil under the wrong celestial influence. That could end very badly. Because in the Middle Ages, the stars didn't just guide sailors and shepherds, they guided your spleen and your gallbladder, and whether or not it was a good day to lance that deeply unfortunate abscess. Tonight, your aching toe, the one that's been red and swollen for a week, is finally unbearable. But you can't just pop by the surgeon's hut and ask for a quick snip. Oh no. First, someone has to consult the stars. Your healer pulls out a well-worn almanac, its pages filled with zodiac wheels, moon charts, and illustrations of confused-looking body parts. She traces a line with her finger, squints up at the sky, then back down. "Saturn is in Leo," she says, frowning. "That rules the heart and spine. But your toe is ruled by Pisces, and Jupiter is not favorable today." You blink. "So, no," she sighs. "Tomorrow, after moonrise." You hobble away, limping dramatically, feeling like your toe might detach entirely in the night. But you respect the system. It's out of your hands now. It's in the stars. This is the world of medieval medical astrology, where every part of the body was linked to a sign of the zodiac. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so on all the way down to Pisces, which understandably got stuck with the feet. So if you had a nosebleed, better hope the moon wasn't in Aries. Otherwise, no treatment for you. Doctors, at least the educated ones, were expected to cast horoscopes for their patients. They'd use a device called an astrolabe to measure celestial positions, cross-reference them with a few star charts, and determine the ideal moment to do anything. Bloodletting, purging trepanation, even giving birth. There are records of midwives halting labor or trying to, because Venus wasn't aligned properly with the moon. Apparently, celestial scheduling outranked contractions. You find yourself back in the healer's hut the next morning. It's misty outside, and the moon has officially waxed just enough for safe minor surgery. You're lying on a table made of something slightly softer than stone, and your healer is sharpening a blade. She hums while preparing a basin of vinegar and herbs. Pisces has moved, she says brightly. Your toe is clear. You nod with grim determination. Let's do this. The blade gleams dully. You clench your fists. The healer whispers something about Jupiter's generosity and slices into the swollen skin. The pain is sharp-hot, but brief. A splatter, a hiss, and suddenly your toe feels lighter, emptier. You glance down. A small pool of pus confirms that, yes, the stars were absolutely right. That needed to happen. She presses a poultice of honey and comfrey to the wound and wraps it carefully. Then she draws a tiny fish symbol on your bandage for Pisces. Not medically necessary, but it feels comforting. You sit up slowly, breathing through your nose, and swing your legs off the table. The toe still aches, but now it's the manageable kind. You can walk again. You thank the healer, who gives you a jar of salve and a stern warning to avoid walking during Mars's hour, just in case. Back in the village square, people are chatting about more than just local gossip. They're comparing planetary alignments, arguing whether Mercury's retrograde phase is affecting fertility, or if Venus's placement last month might be why the baker's cows are producing sour milk. One man insists that his gout flared up the moment Mars rose in the eastern sky. No one doubts him. Astrological medicine even influenced what you ate. Hot, dry foods were discouraged during certain moon phases. Cold, moist herbs were encouraged during others. A rich stew might cure your chills under a waxing moon, but cause imbalance during a full moon. Everything was timing. Of course, not everyone agreed on how to interpret the stars. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians truly believed in the astrology or just leaned into it to maintain status and mystery. After all, if your treatment didn't work, you could always say the stars weren't right. That's not failure, it's celestial bad luck. And then there were the critics. Some monks and scholars grumbled that astrology bordered on paganism. Others thought it was perfectly fine, so long as it didn't replace prayer. A few particularly daring voices suggested that maybe disease had more to do with dirt and spoiled food than the moon's trajectory. Those voices were politely ignored. In the universities, astrology was part of a physician's formal education. Students at places like Salerno and Montpellier were taught how to cast charts alongside their lessons in Galen's humors and Hippocratic oaths. It wasn't superstition. It was science. Their science, at least. And for the average patient, it added a touch of cosmic dignity to otherwise grisly procedures. Being bled dry is bad. Being bled dry in accordance with the stars, now that's healing. You're back in bed by afternoon, foot propped up, self-applied. The pain is fading to a dull throb. You look out the window, past the sagging rooftops toward the cloudy sky. Somewhere up there, planets are drifting. Moons are waxing, and constellations are quietly deciding who gets cured and who gets cursed. You find that oddly reassuring. Because in a world where most treatments involve boiling animals or being poked with sharp things, trusting the stars feels downright poetic. There's structure, order, a rhythm to the chaos. And as you drift off into a nap, the scent of comfrey and beeswax in the air, you whisper a quiet thanks to Pisces, and maybe to Jupiter too, just in case. You wake to the sound of someone sloshing. There's no polite way to describe it. It's definitely the splash of liquid in a wooden bowl, punctuated by the occasional clink of ceramic. You roll over groggy, only to find your healer hunched at your bedside, holding a small glass flask up to the light. It glows faintly gold in the morning sun. She smiles when she sees you stirring. Just in time. We need a fresh sample. You blink. A sample of what? She gestures to a nearby chamber pot with a little too much enthusiasm. Oh, yes, welcome to the world of urine diagnosis, or, as it was called back then, uroscopy, a cornerstone of medieval medicine. If you were feeling off in any way, headache, fever, melancholy, or even a bad dream, the answer lay in your bladder, or more precisely, in what trickled out of it. Urine wasn't just bodily waste. To medieval healers, it was a map, a glowing golden scroll containing all the secrets of your inner health. And they read it like tea leaves, or perhaps more accurately, like a mildly offensive broth. You're encouraged, politely, insistently, to provide a sample. You're handed a matula, a round-bellied glass flask that's oddly beautiful if you forget what's about to go in it. You do what's asked, and the healer swirls the liquid with practiced ease, lifting it up to inspect it against the sunlight, like a sommelier examining a questionable Chardonnay. She hums thoughtfully, a little too cloudy, and it settles too quickly. You watch her scribble something down in a leather-bound notebook. You're tempted to ask what the notes say, but you're not sure you want to know. Urine diagnosis wasn't guesswork either. There were entire manuals on the subject, color wheels, charts, and smell categories. Medieval physicians would compare samples to these guides, judging everything from clarity and hue to scent and the presence of sediment. A yellow frothy urine might indicate overheating of the blood. A black, thick sample. That's bad. Very bad. You don't ask questions when your pee looks like ink. And yes, they tasted it. Not all of them, but some particularly thorough practitioners would dip a finger in and give it a tiny, thoughtful lick. A sweet flavor they claimed was a sign of honey urine, now known as diabetes. Accurate, sort of. Hygienic. Not at all. The healer does not taste yours, thankfully. Instead, she places the matula on a windowsill to settle. The movement of the layers will tell her more, she explains. You nod, trying not to look too long at it. Uroscopy was considered so vital that some physicians wouldn't even need to see the patient, just the urine. People would send flasks by courier, wrapped in cloth across town, or even to nearby cities with a small payment and a description of the symptoms. The doctor would study the sample, send back a diagnosis, and often a detailed treatment plan. Imagine that medieval telemedicine brought to you by P. As your healer flips through her diagnosis book, you glance over her shoulder. Each page has little illustrations of flasks, some yellow, some brown, a few alarmingly red. There are annotations in faded ink, too thin, bad wind, or dark with floating skin melancholia. There's an entire page devoted to green urine. You decide not to read that one. She finally looks satisfied. Your humors are too moist, she announces. We need to balance that. You ask how. She doesn't hesitate. More walking, less ale. Fewer onions. Also, chew fennel seeds at dawn. You blink slowly. That could be worse, but the visit isn't over yet. She brings out a second bowl, a shallow one filled with another person's urine. You hesitate. Is this normal comparative analysis? She says brightly. He has a similar cough. Right. Because why analyze one pee when you can analyze two? This, too, was common practice. Physicians would compare samples to diagnose broader patterns of disease, especially during outbreaks. Some even created entire color-coded boards, organizing urine samples from different parts of a town to track how an illness spread. In fact, there were even uroscopy specialists, doctors who focused almost entirely on urine. They were respected, even feared, for their ability to see what others couldn't. Some were considered nearly prophetic. Others, more theatrical types, might use special lighting candles held behind the flask, or even chant a few Latin verses before delivering their prognosis. A little drama never hurt. Back in your room, the healer is pouring a small amount of warm water into a mortar filled with herbs, licorice root, anise, nettle. She grinds them carefully, explaining that your sluggish kidney wind, whatever that is, needs a little encouragement. You drink the resulting tea dutifully. It tastes like the inside of an old cupboard. You try not to wince. Then she brings over another jar, and, with the most casual tone imaginable, says, "You'll need to apply this externally." You peek inside. It's more urine, but this time aged. Apparently, aged urine left out in the sun until it turned to ammonia was sometimes used as a cleaning and medicinal agent. It could cleanse wounds, lighten skin, and purify the blood through transdermal application. In other words, rub it on, let it sting, and hope for the best. You gently decline. She doesn't push. The truth is, while it all seems absurd now, uroscopy did offer something surprisingly humane. In a time when tools were crude and options few, it gave people a sense of insight, however strange. A way to feel like someone was reading them, understanding their body in a world full of mysteries. You lie back on your cot, your pulse slowed, your stomach full of cupboard-flavored tea, and your charted urine sample still on the sill, catching the light like a stained glass warning. The healer whispers a final prescription sleep under open skies tonight. Something about aligning your body to the stars and letting the excess vapor release. You smile. Sure, why not? That evening, you find yourself lying on a hill just outside the village, wrapped in a blanket, the cool grass beneath you, and the smell of crushed clover in the air. The stars peek through the fading twilight, and you exhale slowly, wondering what your urine will look like tomorrow. Maybe clearer, maybe not. But either way, it will be red. The apothecary's shop is quiet, almost reverent. There's a hush in the air like a chapel. But instead of stained glass and candles, the shelves are lined with jars. Big ones, little ones, squat pots with wax-sealed lids, tall glass flasks filled with liquids in every imaginable shade. Some glow faintly gold. Others are black and syrupy. But one in particular catches your eye. It's labeled simply Mumia. The shopkeeper sees you looking. She leans in, lowers her voice. That one's special. Ground mummy. Good for everything. Headaches, nosebleeds, broken bones, melancholy, even lovesickness. You laugh softly, assuming she's joking. She is not. Welcome to the utterly macabre world of medicinal cannibalism. A very real, very strange chapter in the history of healing. Because, yes, for several hundred years European physicians, nobles and commoners alike, consumed human remains in the name of medicine, and not secretly either. This wasn't fringe folklore, it was mainstream. You pick up the jar. It's warm from the sun, and when you twist it gently, the dark powder inside shifts like dry sand. Mumia originally referred to a resinous substance found in ancient, mummified bodies believed to contain magical and preservative powers. The concept likely came from early Arabic medical texts and was eventually imported into European thought, where it was unsurprisingly entirely misunderstood. By the 12th century, traders were actively importing Egyptian mummies, real ones, grinding them up and selling the powder as a cure-all. The more ancient and tarry the body, the more powerful the remedy. Of course, as actual mummies became rarer grave robbers, took creative liberties. Decomposed criminals were sometimes substituted, coated in bitumen, and sold as fresh stock. And people bought it. Doctors prescribed mummy powder for everything from epilepsy to internal bleeding. Rich nobles kept jars of it beside their beds. Even kings weren't above it. Francis III of France reportedly carried powdered mummy wherever he went, just in case he got hurt on the battlefield. Historians still argue whether this was due to a belief in the preservation properties of mummification, or something deeper, perhaps the notion that consuming a preserved body might transfer that preservation to the living. A strange kind of sympathetic magic. You set the jar down suddenly, aware that your stomach feels less settled than before. But that's not the only oddity on the shelf. The apothecary waves you over to another display where you see small, sealed tins marked Pulvis ex corde humanum, human heart powder. You raise an eyebrow. It's made from criminals, she explains. Executed ones, best taken while fresh. It's very effective against epilepsy. Again, not a joke. The idea here was rooted in the doctrine of signatures, a belief that the qualities of a body part could be transferred through consumption. So the heart, associated with vitality, courage, and spirit, could restore those very qualities to someone suffering, especially if the heart came from a person who died violently. The suddenness, the shock, it was believed to lock their life force in place. Executions then weren't just spectacles. They were also harvest opportunities. Sometimes the crowd would rush in after a hanging, hoping to collect a bit of the executed person's fat, blood, or bone for medicinal use. Executioners themselves became part-time pharmacists. They might keep vials of blood to sell or slice off bits of flesh for the right buyer. And that's where we get to human fat, another treasured ingredient. Known as axungia homines, it was often rendered from the bodies of hanged men. Apothecaries would mix it into ointments, especially for external use, treating gout joint pain or skin diseases. People believed the body's trauma made its fat especially potent. You try not to imagine the rendering process. But wait, it gets weirder. Some recipes called for human skull powder or cranium, humanum scraped from the skull of a person who died a sudden death. Mixed with wine, it was a supposed cure for migraines and even internal bleeding. Sometimes the skull was ground, sometimes boiled, sometimes burned into ash. It all depended on the healer's preference. You glance back at the shopkeeper, who seems utterly unfazed by any of this. She pulls out a small vial filled with something golden and thick. Distilled human blood, she says softly. Very rare. For the most stubborn illnesses. You take a step back politely, declining her offer to sniff it. It's easy to assume this was limited to uneducated villagers or eccentric apothecaries, but that's not true. These treatments were endorsed by learned physicians, taught at respected universities, and published in medical textbooks. The boundary between medicine and magic was porous. If it came from the human body, it had value, maybe even divine power. There were critics, of course. Some theologians found the practice repugnant, questioning its morality and legality. Others warned of the dangers of disease transmission, not that they understood bacteria yet, but they suspected something was wrong. Still, the market for corpse medicine thrived for centuries. You're ushered over to a smaller table, where she offers you a small cup of wine. With a touch of powdered mummy, she says proudly, "For your nerves." You sip politely, grimacing at the earthy aftertaste. It's not all darkness and dread, though. There's a certain logic to it, flawed, yes, but not malicious. These people weren't monsters. They were desperate, inventive, and operating under the best knowledge available to them. If something from the human body could return vitality to another, wasn't it just recycling? A strange, sacred exchange. You walk out of the shop into the cool dusk air, the sky bruised purple and orange. You can still taste the wine and something stranger on your tongue. There's a kind of stillness in the village now, as though the very walls remember what's been swallowed, smeared, boiled, and burned over the years. And maybe they do. That night, you sleep deeply. Dreams filled with golden flasks, dusty jars, and whispers in forgotten languages. In your dream, someone hands you a scroll made of parchment skin. On it, written in curling black ink, is one line: "The cure and the curse may come from the same source." You wake unsure if you feel better, or if you've just gotten used to the taste of ancient bones. The sun is high, the sky a sheet of bleached linen, and you're standing in a small wooden hut that smells like burnt feathers and stale oil. There's smoke curling from a makeshift chimney, and in the center of the room, tied by the feet, is a chicken, a very unhappy one. You're not here for a feast, you're here for a cure. Your fever hasn't broken in days. Your skin feels tight, your joints ache, and your dreams are full of heat and shadow. The healer has already tried broth herbs and a particularly pungent foot bath. Now she's moving on to the next remedy in her arsenal, sympathetic transference, which is a fancy way of saying someone or something else is going to suffer in your place. Tonight, that someone is the chicken. She lifts it from the hook, murmuring softly to calm it, then places it against your bare chest. The bird squirms, flapping weakly. She holds it there for a full minute, murmuring prayers under her breath, her fingers pressing the bird firmly into your burning skin. You stare at the ceiling, trying not to sneeze from the feathers. Then just like that, she pulls it away and swiftly cuts its throat. The blood splashes into a clay bowl at your feet. The bird twitches once, twice, then goes still. Now she says your sickness will pass into the sacrifice. You nod because you don't really have any other options. In medieval Europe, this idea of transference wasn't just symbolic. It was medicine, the belief that illness could move from one body to another, especially into an animal, was widespread. Chickens were popular, but other creatures could be used too: doves, pigs, goats. In some cases, the healer would touch your sores with a raw steak and then feed that meat to dogs, transferring the illness away. The method didn't end with livestock. Some healers believed burning certain objects that had absorbed your sickness, like a shirt soaked in sweat or blood, could draw the illness out as the smoke rose. The worse the smell, the more effective the cure. Today's remedy is more elaborate. After the chicken, your healer prepares a poultice, made from ashes and animal fat, likely pig, judging by the smell. Into this, she stirs powdered bone sulfur and what she calls calx aurum, gold powder. You blink. That sounds expensive. Not real gold, she admits. Boiled coins, just the essence. Of course, alchemically prepared gold was thought to be deeply healing. It was incorruptible, perfect, eternal. So by ingesting or applying it, your own body might gain some of that incorruptibility. A kind of metallic upgrade for your flawed human bits. In fact, some apothecaries sold potable gold, a liquid tonic, infused with gold leaf or gold chloride, promising everything from clearer skin to eternal youth. It rarely delivered on its promises, but it glittered nicely in the bottle. The healer applies the ash and gold poultice to your chest where the chicken lay. It's warm and sticky, and it smells like a burnt offering, which in a way it is. She binds your torso tightly with linen, muttering something in a dialect you don't quite catch. And then she sets the bowl of chicken blood outside the door. "Let the spirits take it," she says. You lie back on a straw-stuffed mattress that creaks under your weight. The linen wrapping is itchy. The fever pulses behind your eyes. But there's a curious lightness in your chest, as though something has shifted. Later, you'll learn that, in some places, healers believed the blood of the sacrificed animal should be buried at a crossroads or near a riverbank, places where energies crossed and could carry the illness away. It wasn't just about removing the sickness, it had to be disposed of properly, like toxic waste wrapped in ritual. You doze for a while, floating somewhere between sleep and waking, when the healer returns with a small clay cup. She hands it to you. "Rooster gall and sage wine," she explains. to chase off lingering spirits. It's bitter, intensely so. But you drink it anyway. You can't help but wonder how many chickens have met their end in this very room. The walls are darkened with soot. There are feathers caught in the ceiling rafters. A few faint brown stains in the floorboards where blood has soaked in and dried. It feels almost sacred, or maybe just grim. Still, there's a logic to it all in that strange medieval way. The idea that illness was a kind of possession, a clingy spirit or miasma that had to be banished not just from the body, but from the world. You couldn't just feel better. You had to cleanse, banish, sacrifice. And this wasn't isolated to peasants or rural villages. Even learned physicians wrote of similar remedies, describing the transfer of disease into animals or objects. One account describes a nobleman cured of seizures after a dove was placed on his head and then drowned in wine. The seizures didn't return. The dove also didn't. Historians still debate whether these cures worked because of some placebo effect, or simply because the patient got lucky and recovered naturally. Others suggest that the emotional weight of the ritual, the pageantry, the sacrifice, the sense of doing something may have had a profound psychological effect. Healing, after all, is more than biology. Back in the hut, the healer begins to clean up. She hums softly, her hands stained with blood and ash. She wraps the dead chicken in a cloth, ties it with twine, and places it in a small wooden box. It will be taken to the forest and buried under a hawthorn tree, she says, for protection. You sleep deeply that night. Maybe it's the wine, maybe the fever's breaking, or maybe, just maybe, the chicken really did take something with it. In your dream, you see it again fluttering gently through a misty wood feathers, glowing gold eyes calm, not frightened, not pained, just gone. And when you wake, your body feels different, lighter. Your skin is still warm, but the ache in your joints is dull now, like a memory rather than a present threat. The healer presses her hand to your forehead and nods. It's passing, she says. You wonder what would have happened if you hadn't accepted the chicken, if you'd insisted on something modern, rational. But here, in this smoky, soot-blackened hut with feathers still drifting to the floor, it's hard not to believe even just a little that something was taken from you and given to something else. The trail to the shrine is steep winding, between mossy stones and twisted roots, and the forest feels unusually quiet. Just the steady crunch of your boots on the path and the occasional bird call in the trees above. Every now and then you pass someone else climbing too. Heads bowed, hands clasped, some whispering prayers under their breath. Each carries something small, a candle, a ribbon, a lump of bread, a lock of hair. You're carrying a sore wrist, and a growing sense of hope, and a chicken bone. But that's another story. At the top of the trail stands a squat stone building, crumbling in places overgrown, in others marked by a simple wooden sign. Sanctus Leontius. Inside lies what you've come for, a bone fragment from the saint's forearm, rumored to heal anything from festering wounds to fevers to excessive sadness. The line stretches out to the door. Some people are singing softly, others are crying. You take your place and breathe in the thick scent of incense, beeswax, and damp wool. There's something about shrines like this, a hush that clings to the skin. Not just reverence, a kind of shared desperation, too. The common human hope that something, anything, might finally work. Because here, in this sacred space, we're not talking about leeches or poultices or ground mummy dust anymore. We've moved on to miraculous healing, saints' relics, holy water, magic words, the medicine of the soul. By the time you reach the front, your legs ache and your wrist is throbbing more than usual. A monk with kind eyes gestures for you to kneel. Before you, resting on a velvet cushion inside a glass case, lies the object of so many hopes, a brittle-looking sliver of bone yellowed with time, nestled in an ornate reliquary shaped like an arm. You expect something grander, but it's just a bone. The monk touches your wrist with a bit of red cloth that's been brushed against the relic. He mutters a prayer in Latin, then presses your hand to his lips. "Go in peace," he says. And that's it. No thunderclap, no angelic chorus, but your wrist feels warm. Is that something people in the Middle Ages deeply believed in the power of relics, objects associated with saints or holy figures? Bones, teeth, pieces of clothing, dried blood, even entire mummified limbs. Anything that had once belonged to a saint could be imbued with divine healing energy. And when you were out of options, that divine spark mattered more than any surgical tool. Relics were big business. Churches that possessed them became pilgrimage destinations, drawing travelers from across continents. Local economies blossomed around them. Vendors sold saint tokens, blessed candles, and authentic splinters of the true cross, some of which were, generously speaking, optimistic in their provenance. Historians still argue how many of these relics were genuine and how many were creative marketing. It's said that there were once enough alleged pieces of the true cross floating around Europe to build Noah's Ark twice, but the faithful didn't always care. Belief made the object powerful. As you exit the shrine, a woman beside you presses her rosary to her lips. "I can feel it already," she says. Her voice trembles, but she's smiling. Down the hill, you spot a small spring beside a stone wall. A boy is splashing water onto his face while his father rubs some into a gash on his leg. A small wooden sign reads, "Sanctified water, do not drink." You've heard of this place. The water's supposed to be blessed by the saint himself, long before he was canonized, when he healed a dying farmer, just by washing his hands in this very stream. Whether that's true or not doesn't seem to matter to the people dunking their faces and collecting the water in jars. Holy water, like relics, held a powerful place in medieval healing. It wasn't just for warding off evil, it was medicine. Splash it on your sores. Mix it into your broth. Sprinkle it on a feverish child or a newly birthed mother. You'd be amazed what a little sacred moisture could do. But it didn't stop with objects and water. Words mattered too. Magic words, sacred phrases, charms. Your healer once whispered something in Old English while wrapping your wound. You didn't catch all of it, but you remember the cadence. It sounded like a poem or a spell. And that's because it probably was both. Charm medicine was widespread ritual phrases combined with physical acts. A 9-herb charm here, a benediction over bread there. Some spells were passed down through generations, whispered into ears, and never written. Others made it into leech books and manuscripts carefully copied alongside diagrams of bladders and bloodletting charts. You remember one particularly memorable charm from your childhood, muttered during a nosebleed, "Blood, blood, go away. Into the earth, not here today." It rhymed better in Latin. People believed that language had power, especially when it came from someone wise or divine. A phrase said at the right moment in the right way could calm a fever, stop a hemorrhage, heal a broken heart. Of course, not everyone approved. Church officials sometimes frowned at what they saw as pagan remnants in these folk traditions. But they also recognized their popularity, and often let them persist as long as saints or angels were name-dropped along the way. As the sun begins to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the trail, you begin your descent. Your wrist still aches, but it's a softer pain now. Like it's listening. Like it's waiting to decide whether or not to get better. You pass, others climbing up, some limping, some carried all looking ahead with that same hopeful determination. Some carry letters. Others, jars of preserved eyes or cloth-wrapped hands they hope to touch to the relic. You understand now. This is more than medicine. It's belonging. It's meaning. It's the kind of healing that goes beyond flesh. That night, back in your cot, you untie the charm cord around your wrist and hold it in your palm. It smells faintly of smoke and lavender. You whisper the prayer again, just in case. And for the first time in days, you sleep through the night. The water is cold, shockingly cold. It grips your skin like a pair of icy hands as you sit shivering, wrapped in damp linen on the edge of a wooden dock. The healer has tied your wrists loosely with a cord not enough to restrict movement, but just enough to keep up appearances. You look up at the gray sky and exhale a cloud of breath, trying not to think about what's coming. Because today, you're not sick. At least, not in the traditional sense. Today, you're on trial. Not for theft, not for lying, for something worse, something intangible. You're being tested for witchcraft. This isn't punishment. Not yet. This is diagnosis. Welcome to the deeply uncomfortable world of trial by water, a strange, cruel cousin of medicine that masqueraded as justice. When a person showed strange symptoms, hallucinations, convulsions, strange dreams, persistent bad luck, or even just rubbed someone the wrong way, they might be accused of harboring evil spirits, or worse, being in league with the devil, and the go-to method of checking, throwing people in rivers. The logic, twisted though it was, followed a very specific path. Water is pure, holy, untouchable. If someone was guilty, truly guilty, the water would reject them. They would float. If they were innocent, the water would accept them. They would sink. It's a win-lose scenario. A float meant you were a witch. A sink meant innocence, assuming you could be fished out in time. You try not to shiver too hard as the crowd gathers at the water's edge. A few look skeptical. A few are downright gleeful. Most are just curious. One woman clutches a rosary. Another holds her child close. The village priest steps forward and mutters a blessing over the river. It doesn't look blessed. It looks freezing. Then, with a nod, you're guided forward. Not pushed. There's a ceremony to all this. The cord around your wrists is checked, a knot. Not too tight. You're lowered gently into the water. And you float. Of course you float. Everyone floats really, at least at first. Human bodies are buoyant. But try explaining that to the people who have already made up their minds. There's a murmur from the crowd. The priest frowns. Someone mutters, "She floated too quickly." You're pulled out, dripping and gasping, and placed on a flat stone. A cloth is draped over your shoulders. The wind cuts through it like a blade. The healer steps forward now, not with herbs or balm, but with a book. She flips through the pages, looking for signs, symbols, marks. "Do you have a mole behind your ear?" she asks softly. You shake your head. She checks anyway. The witch's mark, a harmless freckle, a birthmark, a scar, was often enough to seal someone's fate, especially if it was in an odd spot, or if a pin pricked it and the person didn't flinch. The body became a map of guilt, and no blemish was innocent. She finds nothing conclusive and finally sighs. The signs are unclear. You're lucky. You'll go home tonight. But not everyone does. Trial by water wasn't just about superstition. It had roots in an older idea that the body could reveal truth when logic failed. It was diagnostic in its own horrible way. The church didn't always approve, but it happened anyway, especially in rural villages where fear spread faster than reason. And these trials weren't always fatal. Sometimes they were followed by exorcisms, rituals, or atonements. But if the crowd was angry or frightened enough, the outcome could turn violent. The line between medicine and judgment blurred dangerously in this world. A girl who heard voices might be possessed, A boy with seizures might be cursed. An older woman with a crooked back and a sharp tongue. Almost certainly a witch. You dry off by a fire, huddled in a blanket still shaken. Your healer hands you a steaming cup of something, rosemary sage and a generous splash of ale. She doesn't meet your eyes. Don't worry, she says. It's past, but has it even those who passed the trial were marked, watched. Whispers followed them for years. A late harvest, a stillborn calf, a sudden illness in a neighbor, all could be traced back to that moment in the river. You sip the tea. It's bitter warming, and it doesn't quite wash the shame away. Nearby, someone is muttering over a bundle of sticks arranged in a star. A protective charm. After all, you were just in the river. Who knows what might have followed you out? Magic bad. Magic was seen as both cause and cure. For every curse, there was a counter-charm. For every evil glance, a bundle of herbs. And for every suspected witch, a community desperate for someone to blame. Historians still debate whether the trials were more judicial or medical. Was the goal punishment or purification? Was floating a death sentence or a diagnosis? Records are murky. Interpretations vary. What's clear is that people were scared. They saw illness and misfortune not just as random but intentional. Someone must have caused this. Someone among us. And sometimes those accused leaned into it. Wise women, herbalists, midwives, they often walked a fine line. Too helpful, and they became indispensable. Too mysterious, and they became dangerous. You lie in bed that night, hair still damp, the scent of river mud, stubborn in your nostrils. Your wrist aches where the cord left a mark. You dream of sinking, not fast, not slow, just endlessly falling into a cold that has no bottom. When you wake, the fire has gone out. The hut is quiet. You survived. But something has shifted. No one talks about it the next day, not directly. A few people nod politely. One avoids your gaze entirely. The healer greets you with a smile, but it doesn't reach her eyes. The river is calm again, still, reflective, just like you. The room smells like cloves, sweat, and regret. You're sitting cross-legged on a faded sheepskin rug watching your neighbor drop dried beetles into a bubbling pot. The fire crackles beneath it, and a sticky, rose-colored steam curls toward the rafters. In the center of the room, a bouquet of wilted violets lies beside a jar marked with a crudely painted heart. Tonight's mission isn't to heal an illness. Not exactly. Tonight, we're venturing into the murky realm of love, potions, elixirs, powders, and brews meant to charm the heart. Ignite desire, or at the very least confuse someone into liking you for a week or two. Because who needs honesty and emotional maturity when you've got pigeon blood-powdered pearls and a little bit of cow's milk that's been left out in the sun? The woman across from you, let's call her Milda, stirs the pot with a carved wooden spoon. She hums under her breath, stopping every now and then to sniff the mixture. Needs more nutmeg, she says, as though this is dinner and not sorcery. You raise an eyebrow. And the beetles, a symbol of persistence, she says. You want them to stick around, don't you? Right. You sip the drink she gave you earlier, a pale lavender liquid meant to open your spirit. It tastes like bitter almonds and last year's perfume. Love potions weren't just the stuff of fairy tales. They were real blended, brewed, whispered over, and sold in hush-hush corners of villages and cities across medieval Europe. Some were made with honey and wine sprinkled with herbs like thyme and verbena. Others were, let's say, more adventurous menstrual blood-crushed gemstones, animal parts, even a few drops of nail clippings or hair. The idea was simple. Combine symbolic ingredients with a bit of sympathetic magic, and you could make someone fall in love, or at least fall into bed. Either was fine, depending on the potion's recipe. One infamous recipe called for mixing the sweat of the beloved with ash from a burned love letter then dissolving it in wine. Another used dried sparrow hearts worn around the neck on a red thread. And yes, some included bodily fluids. Let's keep it PG and just say consent wasn't always a top priority in these matters. Historians still debate whether love potions were seen as legitimate medicine or magical meddling. In rural villages, they were sometimes just considered a strong kind of herbal tea. In cities, though, they could get you in real trouble, especially if the victim of your potion happened to be someone important or married. Back in Milda's hut, the potion is ready. She ladles it into a small clay cup and hands it to you. The steam curls upward. It smells vaguely of cinnamon and mud. You're supposed to sprinkle this into your beloved's drink tomorrow evening. She warns you not to overdo it. 3 drops, she says. No more. You ask what happens if you use more. She hesitates. They get attached. You take the cup carefully. You're not sure whether you'll use it. But then again, the town blacksmith did smile at you last market day. Still, something about all this feels risky, because love potions didn't always go as planned. Sometimes they worked too well, leading to obsession, confusion, or emotional collapse. Other times, they didn't work at all, leaving the hopeful drinker sick to their stomach and the object of their affection completely oblivious. There's even a case from 14th century France, where a nobleman reportedly fell in love with a goat for 3 days after drinking a mismeasured potion. Historians suspect embellishment, or perhaps very good wine, but the real danger came when things turned sour. If someone fell for the wrong person, or fell too hard or didn't fall at all, the potion maker could be accused of sorcery. That's how a lot of midwives and wise women found themselves on the wrong end of a witch trial. And it wasn't just love potions. Aphrodisiacs, the more physical cousins of these magical brews, were also popular and equally risky. Recipes included everything from saffron to crushed amber to cantharides, a substance derived from blister beetles, also known as Spanish fly. Used in tiny amounts, it was said to stir passion. Used in slightly more than tiny amounts, it could cause kidney failure, internal bleeding, and a slow, agonizing death. Not exactly romantic. Still, demand was high. People wanted love or lust or just a break from the crushing loneliness of living in a drafty stone hut with 15 cousins and a goat. So they took their chances. You tuck Milda's potion into your satchel and promise to think about it. She smiles knowingly. You'll know when it's time. That night, you sit by your hearth, staring at the cup. The fire pops and crackles beside you. The room is quiet. You imagine slipping the drops into someone's drink, the smile, the gaze, the sudden inexplicable longing. But then what? What happens when the magic fades? What happens when you realize it wasn't real? The medieval mind didn't worry about those questions too much. Love was messy, magic was powerful, and sometimes desire needed a little nudge, maybe even a beetle or two. You set the cup aside, just in case. Outside, a breeze rustles the trees. Somewhere, someone is singing a slow tune about a sailor who fell for a witch and followed her into the sea. The song doesn't end well, but the melody is sweet. You fall asleep wondering whether love brewed in a pot can ever truly match love that grows on its own. In the morning, the potion is cold, still potent, according to Milda, who stops by to check on you. She winks, no shame in needing a little help. You nod, but you don't drink it, not today. You're walking through a narrow street in the lower part of town, and something feels off. The cobblestones are slick with the sheen of what you hope is only rain. A low chant drifts from somewhere behind a shuttered window. Children dance in the distance, but there's no music. Not really. Just the sound of bare feet slapping against stone and the faint jingling of bells tied to ankles. You turn the corner and pause. In the square ahead, 30 people are twirling, stomping, flailing. Their eyes are wild, unfocused. Their mouths are open, but few are singing. Most look exhausted, yet they don't stop. A woman collapses mid-spin, only for someone else to pull her to her feet and keep her moving. No one speaks. No one laughs. The rhythm is frenzied and strange, more fever than festivity. Welcome to the phenomenon historians still whisper about the dancing plague. It wasn't an isolated incident. In 1518 in Strasbourg, now France, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, scores of people reportedly danced uncontrollably for days. Some danced until they collapsed. Some until they died. No one knows exactly why. And though that's the most famous case, it wasn't the only one. Medieval Europe saw a number of mysterious outbreaks, where people often in groups would begin dancing, suddenly, compulsively, without reason. And they couldn't stop. You press against a wall, out of the way, as a sweating man careens past you, shirt half torn, feet bloody. He mutters something about Saint Vitus. That's who people blamed or praised for these frenzies. Saint Vitus, the patron of dancers and epileptics, became the spiritual figure behind this strange affliction. Locals believed those who danced were possessed, cursed, or caught in a divine punishment for sins they hadn't confessed. Theories abounded. Some said it was mass hysteria. Others blamed ergo, a hallucinogenic mold that can grow on rye bread and cause seizures, delusions, and violent physical reactions. Some even thought it was a social contagion, a kind of collective trauma response to famine, war, and plague. Historians still argue, but back then, the treatment was more dancing. Yes. To help cure the afflicted towns would hire musicians clear spaces and try to dance the illness out. Picture that a city hall declaring a state of emergency and hiring a band. It's tragic and a little absurd. You step cautiously into the square. No one seems to notice you. They're too caught up in the rhythm, if it can even be called that. A woman grabs your sleeve. Her hands are ice. She stares into your eyes, then lets go, and spins away, laughing and crying at the same time. You retreat unsettled. Back in your village, there are rumors of another sickness sweeping through the monastery. Not dancing this time, just sneezing, over and over. One monk reportedly sneezed 37 times in a row and then fainted. They've closed the gates. No visitors allowed. The healer thinks it's a form of wind sickness, caused by foul air, or perhaps by a curse. Some believe that illness can be passed through words, spoken or written. One monk reportedly read a letter that made his lips swell and his tongue go black. Another claimed to have fallen ill after hearing a heretical hymn played backward on a broken lyre. So now, no one is singing much. People turn inward, avoiding eye contact. You hear mutterings about cursed bread, and a suspiciously moldy-looking loaf is burned at the edge of town in a small ritual involving rosemary salt and a single clove of garlic. The smoke smells oddly sweet. It's not entirely superstition. That bread may well have contained ergot, the same hallucinogen tied to dancing plagues, but nobody here talks about chemistry. They talk about punishment, spirits, divine wrath, demonic laughter riding on the wind. You spend the night indoors, shutters latched, a pinch of ash smeared across the threshold for protection. You hang a small charm, a carved spiral of bone, from your doorframe. The healer says it wards off mad movement. You don't know if you believe her, but it can't hurt. In the morning, the square is quiet again. No dancers, just dirty footprints, a few dropped ribbons, and a silence that doesn't feel peaceful. More like exhaustion. You head out with a bundle of dried herbs, hoping to trade them for something warm and edible. On your way, you pass 3 villagers, arguing quietly about a woman who's been humming to herself in the fields. They're not sure if she's just happy or about to start spinning. Someone suggests keeping her indoors, just in case. Everyone's a little twitchy now. But here's the strangest thing. Despite the fear, the chaos, the confusion, people still try. They offer remedies, they light candles, they boil water with bay leaves and sprinkle it in doorways. They burn the bedding of the afflicted, and sew tiny bells into their cloaks to shake out the madness. You even hear of someone in the next town trying to create a preventative charm using roasted rosemary rabbit fur and the middle feather of a magpie's wing. Why the middle feather, no one knows, but it worked, apparently. That person hasn't danced once. And so it goes. Some seek prayer, others salt, others try singing in reverse. Everyone does something, because doing nothing means admitting you have no power at all. You pass a house marked with a chalked spiral, and the words, "We are clean," written on the door. A child peeks through the shutters. You wave. You don't talk about the square. Not today. Instead, you stop at the stream and wash your hands in cold water, whispering a half-remembered charm for stillness. The sky is overcast. The wind has shifted. You feel fine. But you hum under your breath anyway, just to be safe. Something slow, something steady. Not too fast. The wind changes again. This time it comes from the hill's dry sharp, with a trace of smoke riding its edge. You taste it before you see it, that scorched bitter tang of burning wood and something less identifiable. You follow the trail up past to the edge of the village where a crowd has gathered near a wide, shallow pit. At the center, a pyre is smoldering, blackened logs still glowing faintly beneath a veil of ash. Whatever was burned here is already gone, but the memory lingers in the air like incense. Cleansing fire, someone whispers behind you. You nod, not entirely sure what that means. But fire has always had a place in healing. It purges, it protects, it destroys. In medieval times, it was as much a scalpel as it was a sentence. And today, it's being used for both. You move closer. The healer stands just beyond the smoke, her face smudged with soot. In one hand, she holds a bundle of dried herbs, sage, wormwood, and rue, tied together with red thread. She casts them into the embers, and the air thickens instantly with a greenish scent, sharp and acrid, almost medicinal. "Breathe it in," she tells the crowd. You do. It stings your eyes, but something about it feels clarifying. Tonight's cure isn't for fever or plague or boils. Tonight, it's for something harder to name, something that clings to the soul. Spiritual affliction, some call it. Others say bad spirits, demonic air, or residual malice. Whatever the name, the cure is. The same fire, smoke, chanting, and a whole lot of faith. And sometimes, yes, a very strong laxative. Because if you really want to drive out the darkness, you need to get everything moving. You're ushered to a small wooden bench beside the pyre. The healer offers you a bowl of what she calls the brew. It's thick, muddy, and smells suspiciously like licorice and turnip. You hesitate, but the pressure from the watching eyes is real. You sip. It's worse than it smells. But this potion isn't meant to taste good. It's meant to cleanse you from the inside out. Medieval purging wasn't limited to the spiritual realm. Physicians believed most disease came from internal blockage. Too much bile, too much blood, too much bad air trapped in the gut. So they prescribed purges, laxatives, emetics, anything that got things flowing. Popular choices included senna rhubarb, root, aloe resin, even boiled onion skins. If you were wealthy, you might receive a tincture of gold dissolved in vinegar, delightfully named aqua regia. It didn't help, but at least it sparkled. The more humble patients got something called cassia brew, a mixture that worked fast, often alarmingly so. If your illness didn't flee, your dignity certainly would. You finish the bowl and sit quietly. The smoke still curls upward, And now the priest joins the healer. He opens a small book and begins to read aloud. It's Latin probably, though. It has the rhythm of a lullaby. The flames crackle softly in time with his words. You glance around. Others are sipping the brew too, some with grimaces, some with determined gulps. One older woman clutches her stomach and begins shifting uncomfortably. The process has begun. Fire and purge, smoke and movement. That's the plan. Not far from you, a young man begins to sob quietly. The healer kneels beside him, murmuring something too soft to hear. He wipes his eyes and reaches into his pocket, pulling out a small token, something bone-white shaped like a rabbit's foot. He tosses it into the fire. Sacrifice. Part of the ritual involves letting go physically and emotionally. People bring tokens of pain, guilt, grief. A coin from a lost lover. A torn piece of clothing from a deceased child. A scrap of parchment bearing a sin never confessed. Each item is cast into the flames. Each puff of smoke carries it upward. Historians still debate whether these ceremonies were medicine magic or something in between. Some claim they were psychological, emotional relief wrapped in ritual. Others point to old pagan customs repackaged in Christian garb. A few believe there's real power in symbolic release, and then there are those who just appreciate a good purge. You feel a familiar stirring in your stomach now. Not spiritual, just very, very physical. You excuse yourself, along with half a dozen others, to the woods behind the hut, where a row of modest privies has been constructed in anticipation. There's no dignity here, only function. But when you return hollow and slightly lighter, something strange happens. You feel better, not just physically. There's a looseness in your shoulders, a quiet in your mind. You sit again. Watch the fire. The last of the offerings have been thrown in. The chanting has faded into humming. Someone hands out warm cider, brewed with cloves and rose hips. A final part of the process. Sweetness after bitterness. The healer raises her voice one last time. Let what is gone stay gone, she says. And the crowd echoes it. Let what is gone stay gone. No one claps. No one cheers. Just silence. Respectful, deep, almost sacred. People begin to drift away one by one into the night. Some smiling, some weeping. All a little changed. You linger, watching the last embers fade into blackened coals. The stars are out now, cold and sharp, scattered like blessings across the sky. You breathe in deeply. No more incense, just air. Clean, ordinary air. Later in bed, you lie with a hand resting gently on your stomach. The last twinges of the purge have passed. Your mind is quiet. Outside, an owl calls once and then falls silent. You think of all the strange, wild, hopeful things people have done to feel whole again. Leeches, charms, toads, chicken smoke and dancing until their feet bled. And now, this. It's not about logic. It never really was. It's about doing something, believing something, participating in the act of healing, however strange, however smoke-filled or sulfur-scented. And somehow, in the middle of all that, your wrist doesn't hurt anymore. Your breathing feels easier, your chest lighter. You turn over, eyes heavy, a strange warmth at the edges of your thoughts. The fire is gone now, and the night is quiet. And now, here you are, still, safe, lying comfortably beneath warm blankets, your breath soft and steady, the strange scents of smoke and sage replaced by the quiet hush of your room, the world of leeches and dancing plagues of smoked chickens and gold-powdered potions. It all drifts away now like steam rising from a cooling cup of tea. Let it fade. Let the echoes of chanting monks and humming healers soften into nothing more than a gentle breeze brushing against your memory. The flicker of candlelight, the clatter of wooden cups, The rustle of old linen wraps let them sink gently into the background. Because tonight was never about the cures. Not really. It was about the people behind them, the ones who knelt in muddy chapels with aching joints and hopeful hearts, the ones who whispered charms to sick children while stirring soup with the same spoon, the ones who tried again and again to ease pain with whatever the earth or the stars would lend them. And somehow, even in the mess, there was comfort. There was care. You're not in a drafty stone cottage now. You're in a bed that holds you wrapped in a warmth that needs no fire. The only ritual left is this one, the slowing of thought, the drifting of breath, the letting go. You did well tonight, just by listening, just by being here. History can be heavy, but you carried it lightly. So close your eyes, let the night deepen, let your body soften, let what is gone stay gone, and let yourself just for a little while be perfectly at peace.